Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with the Marine Resources Council. My name is Bree Forte, and I am the programs coordinator here. And I just wanted to take a moment to talk to you about Lagoon Loyal before we get to the main event. You might have seen as you walked in at the sign-up sheet counter, there is a QR code for an event today. So Lagoon Loyal is a program where you can sign up for benefits, and when you do actions that benefit the lagoon, such as installing a rain barrel or blowing your lawn clippings back onto the grass, that counts as helping the lagoon and preventing stormwater pollution. So every time you do something, you can get rewarded with a coupon at local businesses in the community. And obviously you guys all care about the lagoon and the water quality here because you're attending this talk. So without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Lisa Soto, the Executive Director of the Marine Resources Council.
Thank you, Bree. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. Take my mask off. Okay. Can you hear me better? Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thank you for being here. It's so good to see everybody. I'm sorry for the bad news about Jeff. I guess maybe it's good news that we found out that he was exposed to COVID before he got here, but sadly, he's not able to be here with us today in the Lagoon House. Okay, Steve's like, it's dangling from your ear now. So let me take my mask off. My name is Lisa Soto. I'm the Executive Director of the Marine Resources Council. I'm happy to kick off this year's Lunch and Learn monthly series with a very exciting presentation by our friend and colleague, Dr. Jeff Abel from Florida Institute of Technology. He's going to talk to you about a subject that's been of interest to our entire coastal community for a long time, the idea of opening up or having a one-way inflow of water into the lagoon from the ocean. How will that affect the lagoon's health? Before I introduce Jeff more formally, I would like to share with you a couple of points of information. One, I'd like to introduce my amazing team that are here in the audience with you today that have been supporting this effort and the MRC. Stephen Sharkey here is Marketing Director in the room. The person, the disembodied voice that you hear over the telephone is Nicole Broquet. She was our education coordinator. Now she's working under contract with us. She moved to Tallahassee with her new husband, but she's still working with MRC. In the back, well, you got to meet Bree. She was up here on stage. She's our programs coordinator working part-time. We have two new employees, Caitlin and Allison. Allie's out of the room right now, but they're new educators that have just joined us to expand our education programming. Katie Savoya has been promoted to deputy director. So she's moving into administrative role. It's a very exciting time. Cara Woods is still our Lagoon Watch coordinator. So she'll be working with those of you who are doing water quality testing and any kind of bacterial testing that we've expanding our water quality monitoring protocols and parameters. If you want to get involved in water quality testing, Cara's the person to talk to. We've added a development director, Ken Parks. Many of you may have spoke to Ken. He has helped us create our vision for 2050. And then we have some awesome volunteers working with us today. Mara is our new intern. She's doing restoration work and working with our aquaria. And then we have our fantastic dynamic duo of Dennis and Rhonda that you met when you came in at the table. So wanted to introduce the team as you're coming to our Lunch and Learns. These are the people that you'll be seeing when you get here. So I wanted to let you know who they were. As you know, MRC produces a report card on the lagoon's health every year, and that report is about to come out. So we just sent it off to print. We are sharing some of the results right now. We do need to add the fisheries data. We got them very late. So we're just starting to add the fisheries data. So before we do the full release, we want to show you what the fishing looks like out there. Not from the I caught something standpoint, but from the actual data. 30 years worth of fisheries data from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is what we're looking at to figure out what is going on with our bait fish, with our sports fish, with our trophic species, understanding what's happening with the full collapse of the food web. It's just hard to say. So the report card is coming out soon. So keep an eye out for it and look for us to go out and do the workshops like we've done before. We plan to print a ton, like 10,000. We're going to share them with each county. We want to get 2,000 in each of the 5 counties. We're bringing them to Tallahassee this month. So we'll be up at session with this report saying we demand clean water. We want clean water, please. And that's what we're about right now with trying to save the manatees, save our fisheries, save our shellfish fisheries, is we need the water to be clean, period. That's what needs to happen. We can't start really doing anything else until we have clean water back. So also want to share some good news. MRC is doing great work. We need your help. We need your membership. We want to invite you to be part of the experience here, part of our family. And we're celebrating our conservation awards, and we're honoring some of the lagoon's biggest heroes, people like Paul Kregel, who started Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge. So we're calling them our kind of our next level of lagoon leaders, and these will be called legends. So we're going from conservation award winners to lagoon legends, people of history who have been here fighting for this cause for a long time. We're honoring those legends on February 12th at the Hilton in Melbourne. So if you're interested and you want to get, promote MRC, get involved in our organization, can commit to a $100 ticket. I've got invitations here for you to attend that very, very fun event. So as you know, as we're working hard and fighting as a team, you need to vent occasionally and go have a cocktail. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing every day. Thank you for being part of our mission. Do stay active, stay engaged. Session starts today, tomorrow. So it's time to start looking for those action alerts, checking your emails from us, and getting engaged in that political conversation. And without any more of taking up any more of Jeff's time, thank you, Jeff, for your patience. I'm going to introduce Dr. Abel. Are we ready? All right. Dr. Abel, Jeff, is a visiting research assistant professor at Florida Institute of Technology. He's been there for the last 3 years. And there he has shared his love of science and nature with just about anyone that will listen, is what he's written. But he has been a force of good at FIT. With experience both in the field and the lab, and he's got a cool lab, Dr. Abel works to understand the processes shaping biodiversity from genes to species to help improve the understanding and conservation of marine ecosystems worldwide. So thank you, Jeff, for being here today. I wish you were here physically, but I hope you stay well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, for that great introduction, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to introduce our project to your community. We are real big fans of the work that MRC does and the work that the MRC volunteers do, and we obviously have an interest in helping to try and protect and restore the lagoon, and we think that this project very well aligns with the goals of MRC. Where I really was looking forward to presenting this in person. I think as most of us have been hoping, over and over again to move past COVID, we keep encountering these hiccups that we just adapt to and move on. And so here I am. Luckily, we have this this great opportunity to present remotely. And I can still share the work with a large community here. And so we really appreciate that. If there are any technical snafus as we're moving forward here, I apologize ahead of time. That is one of the challenges of presenting remotely. Nicole or Steve, if there's anything if you notice any issues, please feel free to speak up and see if I can address things on my side here. And with that, I'm going to move on to the presentation, unless anybody has, Nicole or Steve, unless you have any concerns before I get started or any questions.
You're looking good, coming through clear. And if anybody else is having any technical difficulties, the presentation is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page later this afternoon.
Great. All right, thank you for that. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll do a double check to make sure that we're up and viewable. Nicole, can you see the screen?
Looks great.
All right. All right. Well, again, thank you. So as Lisa mentioned, my goal today is to provide a bit of background on this multi-year project that was initiated with support from the legislature, including Representative Thad Altman, Representative Randy Fine, and Senator Debbie Mayfield. Representative Altman and Senator Mayfield in particular have been strong advocates for lagoon health and a wide variety of projects to help conserve and restore the lagoon water quality, including this project. And so what I'm going to go do is I'll provide a brief introduction on kind of the background for the project and the structure of the project, how we've organized it, and then we'll move into an introduction to some of our recent findings from the last 2 years, and then what we're proposing for our next steps in order to determine whether this approach that we're discussing here, or that we're evaluating here, is really a feasible approach to, and a complement to other projects to help improve lagoon water quality. And then before I get going, I want to thank all the partners that have worked with us so far on this project. Whether it's at Florida Tech, we have a wide variety, a large number of faculty involved in this project, and an even larger number of students participating in this project. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this work. And then we have a large number of partners in the community that have helped directly with the project, or by providing advice as we've been moving along here and tuning our approach and identifying the most relevant questions to address. And so with that, obviously, we're well aware of the status of the lagoon. It's in tough shape. This year in particular has been really challenging for the lagoon and for the manatees in particular, but for lots of other species as well. The water quality over the last several decades has been declining, with the past 10 years in particular being particularly bad. And so the result is, and as you are all well aware, is we've shifted. The lagoon itself has shifted into a state where we have frequent harmful algal blooms, extended harmful algal blooms, which has resulted in near complete loss of seagrasses, and then a whole bunch of ancillary negative impacts, or associated negative impacts. And it's clear that something needs to be done. To really highlight this, I don't want to belabor the status of the lagoon, since you all are well aware of it, but I do want to show some data that's the folks up at NASA Kennedy Space Center recently worked up, which is a summary of manatee occurrence and seagrass abundance up there in the Banana River Lagoon. And you can see in this graph here that this data goes quite a ways back. I mean, we're talking about 40 years or more worth of data on both the manatees, which are the blue columns distributed there that you see there in the graph, and then in the red you can see seagrass abundance over that period. The seagrass abundance is showing an obvious decline over time, with a particular pronounced decline back in 2011 with the super bloom that some of you may be familiar with and have experienced directly. The manatees themselves are a little bit more, it's a little bit more complicated, the story with manatees. You see an increase in manatee abundance within the lagoon, within Banana River over that time. Likely that's actually a response to manatees moving from other areas which were already declining and food was already declining into the Banana River, which actually was in pretty good shape up until the super bloom of 2010-11. And then the seagrass within the Banana River took a particularly hard hit. And then the manatees, subsequent years have been struggling to find forage within the lagoon. And so the manatees are the most obvious kind of impact that captures public attention. But keep in mind that the lagoon includes a diverse community, and many species are suffering directly along with manatees, and maybe suffering beyond our notice. And it's with that in mind that MRC and other local groups have been working now for decades to try to find strategies to improve lagoon water quality. There's a whole slew of projects that are actually underway that provide meaningful reduction in nutrients and have the opportunity to restore habitats, and then provide the potential with proposed projects and ongoing projects to continue to try to improve water quality in the lagoon, including making significant, meaningful changes, getting us back to a state that some of you who have been in the area for quite a while might remember of the lagoon in the 70s and 80s, where water quality was regularly pretty good, and you could regularly take your family out fishing and enjoying the lagoon, whereas now it's a very different state. And so these projects, we recognize the value of these projects. We recognize the importance of reducing nutrient inputs, whether it's through infrastructure improvements or eliminating historic nutrient accumulations like through muck dredging. What we're wondering, and what many folks have been wondering for quite a while, is if there might be an opportunity to actually help complement these projects and more quickly restore the lagoon by actually moving ocean water in large volumes into specific regions of the lagoon to help reduce nutrient loads and then help the system itself recover, provide what the system needs in order to be able to help itself recover by further reducing nutrients and then improving water clarity and allowing habitats to be restored, and particularly seagrasses. And then that in relation to that, you would have a restoration of fish communities, nursery habitats, and then hopefully restoration of the lagoon as a whole. And so our project here is specifically focused on this idea of whether enhanced ocean inflow can actually provide a meaningful impact on lagoon water quality. This is based on the fact that similar projects have been constructed and used elsewhere in the world to improve impaired water quality in semi-enclosed and enclosed systems. This includes over in Destin on the Florida Panhandle, and then elsewhere in the United States, but then also internationally, where there's these projects, they range in size. And some of them are actually decades old, others are more recent. The one consistent finding from each of these projects is that water quality is improved. The levels of improvement depend on the system itself. The impacts to the system is unique in each case, generally unique in each case. But what we do see when we look at these other inflow scenarios is that we do see water quality is improved. Whether that's an appropriate approach here in the IRL is still a question to be answered. So based on this work, in 2017, the St. Johns River Water Management District initiated a feasibility study where they were actually exploring the feasibility of using enhanced water flow to improve water quality. And what they did through contracts with CDM Smith and some other groups was to first assess the most appropriate location for inflow of this magnitude, and then also to explore different options, like actually the engineering of these different systems and which one might be the most appropriate given costs and likely locations. That study stopped after it was a several multi-year study, but then the study they didn't continue on with the study with a direct actual moving the development of a system and the actual pumping of water into the lagoon, in part because of cost and in part because there's the concerns, at the state and St. John's were pulled in different directions by a number of issues that arose, and so this idea of moving water from the ocean into the lagoon to improve water quality has been kind of on the back burner for a few years, and it's been recognized, though, that we do need to understand whether this is going to work as an effective strategy. And as part of that, the IRL NEP actually added the recommendation for the need to develop a pilot project to test some of our ideas about the effects of moving ocean water into the lagoon as part of the CCMP, the 2030 CCMP. So this is an action item that the IRL NEP has identified as an important measure to better understand what tools we might have access to down the road to help improve the lagoon. And so with that in mind, and with the support of the state legislatures, we've initiated a project that builds off of prior work conducted by St. John's and leverages some of the successes of existing projects established elsewhere in order to determine whether we can use this strategy here in the lagoon to complement the many other restoration activities and nutrient management activities that are initiated at the county and the state level and overseen in many cases by St. John's River Water Management District. And so we have at Florida Tech, we have a broad team of scientists working on examining the lagoon hydrology, the geochemistry, and the biology in order to be able to determine whether this might be a viable approach for improving lagoon water quality. We also have a group looking at engineering options, alternative engineering approaches to see what will be the best, most cost-effective and least impactful approach if something of this, if this idea is continues to be interesting and worthwhile to pursue. And then, you know, as part of this project, we are recommending the need for a pilot study to actually test some of the predictions that we have. And so with that, I'll provide a little bit more background on the project. We've completed 2 years so far of the project where we focused on identifying and actually getting in the water and exploring and evaluating a variety of candidate sites for an inflow pumping system. We've established our partners with Florida Tech, and then outside of Florida Tech have established predictive models to look at the hydrology, at the sediment transports, at nutrient dynamics within the lagoon under a variety of scenarios. And then we've also initiated baseline collection to improve our understanding of the current status of the lagoon, who occurs where, in what numbers, in order to be able to provide a meaningful test of potential impacts of inflow if we do initiate a pilot project and then at some point potentially further down the road carry out with the construction of a larger system. And so with that in mind, I want to provide some of our findings from phase 1 and phase 2 of the project, which phase 2 was recently completed in June of this past year. And so before I go into some of the detailed findings, I wanted to share an example of the modeling work that some of our team has been doing. This is right here in front of us, and I actually might as well fire this up. Let's see if we can get that going. Yeah. Hopefully you're able to see an animation that's comparing existing conditions, so current conditions, and modeled conditions under a relatively high inflow rates for the levels of a tracer. This is basically a virtual particle that's added to the system. And then in these models, embedded in these models, we can then track the distribution and movement of that tracer and the life cycle of that tracer, because these are non-conservative tracers, so they're being processed similar to the way nutrients would be processed within the system itself. Except in what we have here is we've added ocean inflow, and in this case we've added it at Port Canaveral, which has been kind of the focus of a lot of these efforts, in part because of just the feasibility of being able to get water quickly and easily right at Port Canaveral there, and that means low cost and low impact, relatively low cost and low impact. And so what you see here is you can see that the inflow in this model is actually reducing the levels of this virtual tracer. In this case, the tracer is representing nutrients. But what we have, this is just one of many parameters that the models are testing. And this is just one run of many runs that the model that was established by Dr. Zerillo is being used to evaluate. And so with that, let's see, we're roughly a similar place right here. I'll move on to some of the actual modeling results. So the modeling work conducted by Dr. Zerillo in partnership with a number of folks, it includes the central and northern IRL and the Banana River. It's a long-term model that's been iteratively developed over many years and validated at each step of the way. And so it's providing a robust estimate for current and then projected conditions, water quality conditions, including dissolved oxygen and a number of other parameters. And what Dr. Zerillo found is that when he includes ocean inflow, so in his model, when he moves water in his model at a variety of different rates from Port Canaveral into the Banana River in particular, and so all these results, all these modeling results I'm going to present are based on a focus of inflow at Banana River, which is not, we are not saying that that is the recommended site for a full system. That is just a site that we're prioritizing now for a pilot system because of the ease with which we can get water from Port Canaveral, relatively clean water, to move into the Banana River. So the modeling has focused on that scenario as well. And what we see is that under different inflow scenarios, we see improved dissolved oxygen in the water. And that's a really important parameter for all the flora and fauna that lives within the Indian River Lagoon. And I'm going to go a little bit more into the importance of that parameter in a couple minutes here. Dr. Zerillo in his model has also seen with inflow that we do see a significant reduction in nutrients. So total nitrogen and total phosphorus are reduced after 1 year of inflow at a variety of rates, with the reduction actually tying quite closely with the volume of pumping that he is modeling in these different scenarios. We also see, and this is a really important point to make, in Dr. Zerillo's models, as we see nutrients being reduced in the Banana River with these different inflow scenarios, we do not see a related increase in nutrients at Sebastian Inlets. And that's an important point to make, simply because a lot of concerns about this sort of approach are focused on the potential movement of nutrients and the shifting of impacts from one area to another. And so our goal is not to simply move nutrients from Banana River into some other compartments of the lagoon and make for increased problems in those compartments. What we want to do is reduce total nutrients in the lagoon with a focus on the Banana River, which used to be kind of the gem of the lagoon and has since been struggling considerably over the last 10 years. And is in a really dire state right now, with some of the highest algal loads and some of the highest nutrient loads in the lagoon. And so what we can see here in the modeling, and again, this is just the modeling results, what we can see is that we can reduce with inflow. We predict that nutrients would be reduced within Banana River. They would be reduced below thresholds to a point where we actually would see a reduction in algal concentrations, and then potentially a reduction in HAB frequency. We're still working on that component of the model, or I'll say Dr. Zerillo is still working on that component of the model. But what we do see in Dr. Zerillo seeing in his models is that chlorophyll concentrations as a proxy for algal loads are reduced under inflow scenarios without any increase in nutrients exported out of Sebastian Inlets. And so these findings, they were actually quite a surprise to us on the team. We did not expect to see such a remarkable change in nutrient loads and in chlorophyll levels within the Banana River with these various inflow scenarios. But when we dove into a little bit more deeper into the model and looked at some of the details, what we noticed is that there was there seemed to be a particular threshold effect for dissolved oxygen and temperature, and they were having a big impact on nutrient loads. And so a small change, a reduction in average temperatures by moving ocean water into the lagoon, and a small increase in dissolved oxygen that would come from the ocean water being moved into the lagoon. Those can have a remarkable benefits on, or they're predicted to have a large benefit on nutrients concentrations within the lagoon. And so to directly test that assumption, the model based in the model, and to determine what's driving that change, Dr. Austin Fox has been doing concurrently research in the field and in his lab on the geochemistry of the lagoon, both within the water itself and then in the sediments. And so what happens to nutrients under different levels of oxygen? What happens to nutrients under different temperatures when the water and the sediments are at different temperatures? And one of those interesting things that Dr. Fox saw as soon as he started deploying sensors to track oxygen right down there at the sediment interface is that he realized from his data, and you can see here, you have in pink data for dissolved oxygen right down there at the sediment interface. So that's as we're talking like 2 inches just above the sediments. And then you have data above that for a co-located sensor that is mid-water, which is where most of the sensors are, because you can't, these sensors are expensive. And so you try and pick when they deploy these sensors, whether it's Harbor Branch or St. Johns River Water Management District, deploying these sensors, they pick the best site they can that's going to give them as good of understanding as possible of the general condition of the lagoon. Well, what we can see here, though, is that the mid-water dissolved oxygen sensors are suggesting that dissolved oxygen is over this time period shown here. Dissolved oxygens did not go down below a threshold level, which would cause direct impacts to seagrasses and to other organisms, in the sediments or just in the area. But if we look at the dissolved oxygen just above the sediments, take that as a proxy for the dissolved oxygen in the sediment itself, we can see that the sediment is regularly going hypoxic, meaning that DO, or dissolved oxygen, is so low that it's actually directly impacting the organisms that live in that environment. And it's also directing nutrient cycling. And it's the nutrient exchange, the nutrient flux between the sediment and the water that's become a big focus of this project with this data that's Dr. Fox has developed. And so with this data in mind, Dr. Fox set about to look at nutrient levels under different dissolved oxygen conditions, under different amounts of oxygen in the water and sediments. And what he found is that as you increase dissolved oxygen in the water, the sediments are capable of actually absorbing nutrients. They absorb and either bind the nutrients specifically, or they digest the nutrients. The microbial community that lives within the sediments will digest the nutrients and process them and remove them completely from the system. But what happens when dissolved oxygen goes too low is that the microbial community shifts to what they call anaerobic respiration. There's not enough oxygen to support their growth, but they're equipped, or at least some members of this community are equipped to survive when oxygen levels are low. And that part of that community prospers in these scenarios. And then they will actually alter how nutrients are being metabolized by the system itself, to the point where now nutrients are actually being released into the water rather than absorbed, digested, and processed, and then eliminated by the microbial community that exists in the sediments. And so that specifically describes what's happening to nitrogen compounds. Phosphorus itself is actually binding to the sediments, and under low DO events, that binding is disrupted and phosphorus is released into the water. And then at higher DO events, or at higher dissolved oxygen, the phosphorus binds to the sediments and is removed from the system. And so these are really striking patterns, and the threshold that Dr. Fox has identified for each of these parameters is in line with what's regularly happening in the lagoon right now. And potentially with pumping, we can move temperature and dissolved oxygen above these thresholds to then promote microbial elimination of nutrients and the binding of the phosphates. What Dr. Fox has also found is that in looking at the different types of nutrients and the ratios of different compounds that are in the water under given conditions, under particular conditions, he's found that actually with higher DO and active microbial processing of these nutrients, that the nutrient ratios within the water column will also shift. And this is important because just like when you have a garden in your backyard and you're providing one type of fertilizer for your palm trees and a different type of fertilizer for your tomatoes and a different type of fertilizer for your roses, Those are all based on nutrient ratios, and different plants need different nutrient ratios. Well, right now, the nutrient ratios that are most common in the lagoon support algal growth. With inflow and with a restoration of natural nutrient cycling, our proposal is, the data is suggesting that we can actually help not just reduce nutrient loads, but we can shift the nutrient ratios to be less favorable for algal growth and more favorable for seagrass growth, which is a habitat that we're really looking to restore because of its crucial role as a fish nursery. And so we also have to take into account what may happen with the inflow to the biological community. Our goal here is to improve water quality to help restore the biological community. That's what we're most interested in. That's our end target, ultimately, of all of these restoration efforts. But in the end, a large engineering project like this needs to take into account potential negative impacts as well. And we need to establish baselines for tracking impacts down the roads and to then follow through and see if our predictions actually hold true. And so with that in mind, we've developed, using the FIM data, so fisheries independent monitoring data by the Florida FWC. And this is the same data that it sounds like MRC is going to be working with presenting in their upcoming lagoon reports. One of the members of our team, Dr. Jesse Blanchard, developed a model to actually test the relationship between the abundance of key fishes in the lagoon in nutrient levels in the lagoon. And he found that for these key fish that he looked at, common fish, whether they're forage fish or they're just popular sport fish, he found that there is a really close relationship between nutrient loads, chlorophyll level, and species abundance. And as chlorophyll goes up and nutrient loads go up, species abundance for most of these species declines. And then with the pumping scenarios that we have modeled out, he projected an actual reversal in that decline and an improvement in the abundance of most species with in reducing nutrients and improved dissolved oxygen. We're also initiated a study of environmental DNA to provide a real-time assessments of fish community diversity across the central and northern portions of the lagoon into the Banana River. This is actually some data from the eDNA data depicted here, showing in red sites in the Banana River, and then heading south from there out to sites near Sebastian Inlet in blue on the right in these graphs. And what you're seeing here is estimates of community diversity, with the Banana River and Central IRL being having the lowest fish diversity across this sampled region. And we see in this data, we see indications of particular impacts to the from HAB occurrences, from frequent algal blooms to the Banana River community in particular. And we'll continue to track that community and assess changes in that community over time with both the proposed pilots and if at some point a full pumping scenario is established, full pumping system is established, then as well with that system. And then we also have a large collection of improved data on plankton and on infaunal communities and on seagrasses and drift algae to then be able to track changes in these communities with inflow, whether it's a pilot project or a potential larger future system. And so all of those results are pointing in favor of this strategy, but they're all just predictions right now based on either models or some current data. But nonetheless, these are predictions about what might happen with inflow. And so what we need to do is we need to test these predictions before we go about approving and getting permitting and funding for a large system. We need to make sure that these predictions are robust and valid before we offer conclusions about whether a full system is an appropriate strategy or not. And so with that in mind, we are working to secure funding to initiate a pilot pumping project. So this is a research pumping project, low volume, where we would be moving water from Port Canaveral into the Banana River, into a constricted cove within the Banana River, and tracking how that area responds to inflow, and particularly how the geochemistry, how the nutrient cycling responds. And does a particular question for us is, does the nutrient cycling respond in the way that we're predicting with increased dissolved oxygen and slightly reduced temperatures with the inflow of ocean water? Do we see the improvement in nutrient cycling that both Dr. Zerillo's model and Dr. Fox's work suggests that we will see? And so with that in mind, we've explored a number of locations for the potential pilot sites. In the end, we ended up selecting Port Canaveral, which is also the site that St. John's had recommended for a pilot project. It comes down to just the ease with which we can move relatively clean water from one location to another. Moving water from the ocean into the lagoon would be a more ideal situation, but the cost of actually moving water under A1A, it kind of eliminates that as a really effective strategy. And the relative cost of being able to, and the relatively minor impacts of moving water from Port Canaveral into the lagoon is just much more amenable to a project like this. And so we've explored a variety of flow rates for the pilot project as well. And initially a flow volume of 5 cubic meters per second was proposed by St. John's. But you can see here our modeling results for the projected impact of of inflow at that volume on the Banana River. If I remember correctly, this is salinity. We would see a change in salinity across a large area with a system like that. What we don't want for a pilot project is we want to minimize our impacts. What we don't want is to worry about potentially impacting the whole system and the potential negative consequences that come from that. We also, as part of our experiment, we need to preserve areas, reference areas for the project that are unimpacted by inflow. So we can have those as a reference for comparing fish occurrence, for comparing invertebrate occurrence, for comparing seagrass and oyster outplanting success. And then also for testing the geochemistry response as well, the geochemical response. And so with that in mind, we were able to scale back the volume of water that we're proposing to move for the pilot project to 0.5 cubic meters per second. Again, and the reason we were able to scale that back is because we've targeted, oops, where'd my arrow go here? We've targeted this cove here just below Port Canaveral locks as our study area. And so what we are proposing is to move water from Port Canaveral locks actually across U.S. Army Corps land here. And we've been working with Army Corps land to design a project that would meet their approval and their permitting. And then into this cove. This is just adjacent to Avocet Lagoon here. And this cove is a highly impacted site. There's accumulations of muck on the bottom, significant muck deposits. What we would be doing would be moving this water, and we would be looking at changes in dissolved oxygen, looking at changes in temperature, and then relating those changes to the geochemistry and also the species occurrence in that area, and testing whether the predictions from the first 2 years of research actually hold true and continue to support the idea of using inflow as one of many strategies to help improve the lagoon water quality. And so we have a focus again on Port Canaveral, specifically Port Canaveral Lock, a low pumping rates for the pilot project of 0.5 cubic meters per second. This has reduced project cost considerably compared to 5 cubic meters per second. And it also reduces potential negative impacts. It confines impacts to pretty much just that treatment area, or I'm sorry, not the treatment area, but the experimental area there, this cove just south of the locks. And then this would allow us to directly test some of the predictions that we've made in year 1 and year 2. And so with that in mind, we're right now seeking funding for the pilot projects, and we're looking to initiate this pilot once funding is available. We'll initiate the project within a half year of funding becoming available. The project would be, the pilot itself would be in operation for just 1 year, and then it would be temporary. It would be removed from that location, or we would summarize our findings, present them to stakeholders, present them. I would be happy to come back and give a presentation here to the MRC community. We would also be presenting these findings to state legislatures, to DEP and St. John's River Water Management District, so that then they can decide, and that we all can decide based on the data, whether this is really an effective tool as a complement to all the other approaches that are currently being used and explored to help improve water quality. Basically, the way we see it is that it's an all hands on deck kind of approach right now. The lagoon is in such tough shape that we need to explore every option to improve water quality. And this is just one of many that might help in the long term. And what we're looking for is to just develop the pilot to continue exploring this idea. And at the moment, that's where we're at. We're on hold until we can secure funding for the pilots, which we're working with the state right now and looking into other opportunities as well to secure funding for the pilots. And with that, I don't know how much time I've used up there, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. I'm happy to answer any questions the community has, whether via chats or live. And Nicole, I think maybe I'll let you step in and describe how you want to field the questions. And if, oh, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if Nicole wasn't there, I was going to ad lib it a bit. But if you're there, Nicole, please feel free to let the community know how you want to handle the question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that very informative presentation. It was great to be able to see all that information presented. I do believe that I think Dr. Lisa Soto will be addressing the questions to the group.
Great.
Can you hear me? This is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, you can hear me. Okay, I've got some questions and they're in the Q&A. So those of you who've raised your hands or put questions in other places, please put them in the Q&A because that's where I am reading them from. Okay, so the very first question is, could you relate the water characteristics of one, pre-algae Banana River Lagoon, 2, post-bloom Banana River Lagoon, and 3, the ocean?
Well, so I'm not a geochemist, so I don't want to make too much of a hash of that, of those conditions and those parameters. But I will say that Dr. Fox has been looking at the nutrient levels and nutrient cycling in the lagoon under different water quality conditions, and then also taking water and sediment samples back to his lab and exploring how the nutrients in particular, but also dissolved oxygen, how they respond to different temperatures and different dissolved oxygen levels. And we do see, Dr. Fox does see a nice correlation between temperature and dissolved oxygen and nutrient levels. What we don't have right now is an understanding of those nutrient dynamics prior to the super bloom, or even better, what we really would like, what those nutrient dynamics look like before nutrient loads were high 20, 30 years ago even. And the lagoon was in a state that maybe some of you are more familiar with from the 70s and 80s and maybe early 90s as well, where the water quality was regularly quite good and supported, and nutrient loads were relatively low. And then also the plankton community, the plankton community in that case would have been far less abundant. And we have that data. The monitoring that St. John's and Harbor Branch have been doing going back 30 years or more shows clear trends in increasing nutrients and increasing plankton loads. But there was a change of state. Something happened in 2010-11 with the super bloom that really shifted things. So there was a dramatic change at that point. And that's an area that a lot of people are actually spending time researching to better understand what caused that shift and to see what opportunities there are to kind of restore the balance back to the pre-2010 conditions, and then work backwards from there to conditions that some of you in the audience might be more familiar with from the 70s and 80s.
Thank you, Jeff. This one kind of is in line with that, so I'm going to skip around a bit. But Would the enhanced ocean inflow raise salinity in the lagoon? And if so, how would that change the ecosystem is the original question. And then I'll add my concern, which is of all the myriad of algae that we have, algae that are out there right now, every color under the sun, we don't have red tide. We don't want Corynea brevis in the Indian River Lagoon. And if we're increasing salinities, is that in your wheelhouse? Are you thinking about that? So go ahead, Jeff. Thank you.
Without a doubt. So the modeling right now does predict that there would be a marginal increase in salinity across the Banana River with a full system. With a pilot project, we would only see an increase in salinity within that little cove that we identified just below Port Canaveral. So the impacts would be fairly constrained. That is definitely something we need to take into consideration. The change in salinity that is projected right now is well within the range of salinities that these communities experience in the lagoon with say increased rainfall with a rainfall event, so increased runoff, sorry, with a rainfall events, or pronounced periods of low rain and actually evaporation, and you get high salinities sometimes quite high salinities in the Banana River and Mosquito Lagoon in particular. However, we do need to take into account that a modest change in salinity may impact sport fish reproduction, and that is part of what the modeling effort is looking at, is what are these changes going to have on the communities that we wish to actually benefit with inflow? And will there be potential negative impacts that we need to take into account as we explore this strategy? And so those are exploring those potential impacts is well embedded in this study. Regarding the potential impacts of salinity on different algal species and the likelihood of maybe improving conditions and eliminating or reducing the frequency of algal blooms of one species and then inadvertently promoting another species, this is what the pilot is perfect for. The pilots and the tracking of planktonic communities right in the area of the pilots and across a gradient of impact from the pilot itself, a gradient of salinity and other changes, dissolved oxygen, nutrient levels. We can actually directly track how that community is responding to these these changes that pumping would induce. Right now, the projection is based on the fact that we do have inflow already through the inlets and through Port Canaveral even with the locks, and we have yet to have significant Corynea brevis in the lagoon. The prediction is that the inflow itself would not change that risk at all, but yet we need to actually test those predictions with the pilots.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I'm getting lots of questions here. Mandy, your question, I think, was close enough to that I'm going to skip that one. I hope you're okay with that. Do the DO levels and sediments change from muck to sand is the question. Do you understand?
Yes, I do. And again, this would be a question that if you presented this question to Dr. Fox, you'd have to rein him in because he'd spend an hour talking about this because he understands the system really well and he's really passionate about it. And muck has been a focus of his research. But what I've absorbed from Dr. Fox through our many conversations and reviewing his work is that, yes, there is a pronounced difference in the dissolved oxygen concentrations in the muck and in the sediment itself. The muck is basically hypoxic. The dissolved oxygen is not getting into the muck beyond just the superficial level. And so the only organisms that can survive in hypoxic environments or anoxic even, which is no oxygen whatsoever, can actually live in the muck. And they do find some organisms in there. Burrowing organisms are able to make a burrow and draw down fresh water and then therefore stay oxygenated. Or the bacterial community is primarily anaerobes that occur in the muck, which is one of the reasons that we do get that release of nutrients regularly from the muck. And that's one of the reasons that we need to continue to prioritize removing those muck, whether removing it or capping it, whatever strategy is best determined to isolate those nutrients and keep them from continuing to flux into the lagoon and contribute to harmful algal blooms.
Thank you, Jeff. This one is asking if you've compared this approach to the approach of cutting a new inlet. And if so, how does the effectiveness compare?
We can model a new inlet, but a new inlet is just not a feasible approach, given both the cost and the challenges with permitting. In discussions with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, what we've seen is that they're not willing to even consider the opportunity of a new inlet, and then a new inlet also draws. It might, even if permitting was possible for a new inlet might not really be the best approach for us, because with an inlet, you have tidal exchange. You have water moving in and then moving out. And that flushing is really important to that area within the vicinity of the inlets. But the extent of that tidal exchange and the extent of the extent of those benefits does not stretch that far beyond the inlet itself. A couple miles beyond the inlet, either north or south, and you see no tidal exchange, and you see really no meaningful impact from the inlet itself. Whereas unidirectional movement of water might actually help restore the system itself to be able to start processing those nutrients, and further reducing the nutrients over a larger area. And that's at least what the modeling right now is suggesting. So the idea of using a pumping system is both, it's being prioritized right now, both just because of the potential feasibility of it and the likeliness of having a more controlled impact on the system. And worst case scenario, if something does go wrong, we can shut it off and we can then address the issue before we decide whether to turn it back on or not.
Okay, fantastic. Is there an additional value to a two-way weir design where the outflow relief of high water conditions can occur? I'm not sure I understand the question very well. I know who wrote this one. I'm probably massacring your question, but I guess the question could be, why not have a two-way weir design where you can have that outflow relief? And is there some concern about a buildup of water in the banana, from pumping at higher rates, ocean water or into the banana river? Is there going to be an increase in levels of water elevation in the banana? And is there an additional value to actually having a two-way design to relieve that condition?
Yeah, I think the two-way design gets back to basically the bidirectional flow that you get through an inlet and the limited impact of that based on the modeling results that I've seen. And so in a sense, I think you'd just be replicating that potentially at even lower volumes than you would get moving through an inlet. The unidirectional flow, and that allows us, one, to control the flow, have very precise control over the flow. And also it is continual addition of higher quality water, so lower nutrient water, higher DO water into the lagoon, instead of just counting on that addition every 12 hours. And so what we would, and so there was kind of two questions that were there. One was just regarding the flow direction, bidirectional versus unidirectional, but then the other is regarding the potential for inflow to alter water levels in the Banana River or other compartments. And we've specifically looked into that because that is a very legitimate question. We don't want to initiate a system that's then going to result in flooding and have all these inadvertent negative impacts to infrastructure. Clearly, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doesn't want to see that happen. Homeowners don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see that happen. And as part of that, actually, I just wanted to present here, I have some data, which is showing, I'm assuming we can still see my slides. This is actually just change in water level at Carrs Park in the Northern Banana River. You can see a change of almost 1 meter from the highest level to the lowest level at this location. And so the lagoon levels do fluctuate considerably throughout the year, particularly as we move into the fall when we have the higher lagoon levels due to slacking of the Gulf Stream or relaxation of the Gulf Stream. Right now, the modeling efforts has shown that inflow, even at really high volumes, potential future volumes of a full system, would only increase water levels within the Banana River by a couple centimeters. And so very small change compared to what you see here for the annual change in water level. And with an inflow system like the one that we're proposing, you could turn it off actually during or on the run up to high sea level periods like the fall, where we know that naturally we're going to have some improved flushing because of the high sea level and then the movement of that water back out of the lagoon. in order to avoid potential impacts. If needed, we could actually turn the system off on the run up to that season. And so basically we could have a seasonal system that addresses water quality maybe in the summer or at other times of the year when water quality is particularly low, and then the system is turned off to avoid other potential negative impacts.
Thank you, Jeff. There are so many questions. I'm going to try to kind of roll them together here. So there's a series of questions about timing, and they go from the model run that you showed that demonstrated the change in, I guess, water quality or the change of that parameter that you were looking at. How long was that? How long did the model run? And then how long did the effect last after you turned after you, in theory, turn off the inflow? And then it kind of leads to the series of questions on, so the inflow project, it's permanent? If this is a permanent feature that would be installed, in theory, and run constantly, and maybe with some variations in season as you just described, or what's the timing? So the timing of the effectiveness that you showed, how long of a time frame was that model run? And then, in reality, then how does that translate to the real world? Does it turn into a continuous pumping situation?
Those are really good questions. And so the model runs, the model runs have been, the model itself has been run for anywhere from a year to 3 years, depending on the run and the question being addressed. So there's iterative model runs asking different questions and altering scenarios, inflow scenarios. And Dr. Zerillo has run those over typically a year, but then many of the final runs for a given project or sub-project would be for 3 years. And the model runs that I was just presenting there on the slide, I think that was a year's change, if I remember correctly, from those animations. What happens after we shut off the pumping system? That is a really good question. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that data. I would expect that we would see the system just slowly recover back to the baseline condition, unless we were able to, in concerts with other management strategies like nutrient reductions, we were able to use inflow to jumpstart natural nutrient cycling within the lagoon, and then to get the lagoon up to a point where it can start taking care of itself, and then to restore the lagoon, the health of the lagoon, to a point where then the reduced nutrients through these other mitigation strategies in combination with a restored nutrient cycling together can help maintain the health of the lagoon without future pumping. We don't know when that scenario would be, at what points, but we do not expect that if there is approval and support for a full system, we do not expect it would be a forever project. We expect that many of these other changes that are being proposed for the lagoon, including causeway lifting, which would be not a small undertaking at all, but and then the conversions of septic to sewer, we expect all of those are going to have benefits to the lagoon that ultimately, perhaps in combination with inflow, could be able to get the lagoon to a point where it can take care of itself.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. The next, I'm again trying to summarize a series of questions, but these questions are kind of about cost and who's funding and who's lobbying. So they go, is the pilot design cost funded under the sales, the Indian River Lagoon, Save Our Indian River Lagoon sales tax that Brevard County is implementing? What is the cost? What's preventing the site from the study from moving forward? Is it the cost? Who is funding it, and who has been funding it? Are they going to continue to fund it? And that's it. They're all because how much is it going to cost, Jeff?
Well, the project has been supported very generously by taxpayers through funding, direct funding from the states as part of our year 1 and year 2 feasibility studies. And again, thanks particularly to Senator Mayfield and Representative Altman for providing that support and the support for the phase 1 and phase 2 of the projects. As far as our long-term costs, what we're picturing right now is a lot of it is really going to depend on how permitting goes. We're projecting anywhere between $3 to $5 million to complete the pilot study, and a lot of that is going to depend on how permitting goes and what the considerations are for the permit itself, and additional changes we might have to make to align with permits for the pilots. We consider this a relatively low cost investigation of what could be a really effective strategy. But I understand that there are a lot of priorities that we all have for the lagoon. There are a lot of projects that we need to continue to support, in addition to exploring potential future opportunities.
Great, thank you. The next series is about concerns and questions about the quality of the water that you're going to be pumping into the North Lagoon. So questions about exotic invasive species that might be at the port brought in by ship ballast water. Questions about other contaminants in the port that might be now being pumped into the Banana River and entering into the northern portions of the Indian River Lagoon. Things like that. So I'm sure, have you all already done sampling, or is that part of the pilot project? Have you sampled the port to understand what you're dealing with in terms of port water chemistry and biological species, exotic invasive species?
We do. There are biological assessments of the port community, and so we have an understanding of the common invasive species that occur there. And then also we've initiated a study of ports' circulation patterns. So the hydrology of the port itself, and also the nutrient cycling within the port. And that was part of what Dr. Fox was looking at. In order to be able to make his predictions, he needed to know the quality of the water that we were proposing to move into the lagoon. And so we have a good understanding of that, the nutrient levels, the parameters for that water, and the nature of the port community itself. One of the reasons that we chose the ports is because these water exchanges are already happening. So that actually mitigates a number of our concerns right away. If we were to initiate an inflow system in a completely isolated portion of the lagoon that hasn't experienced regular exchange with the ocean for tens of thousands of years, if ever, we would then have significant concerns about the potential for introducing species, altering community dynamics in that system that we would have to address. The fact that the port is already, through Port Canaveral locks, exchanging water and providing opportunities for the introduction of these species to Banana River mitigates the concern from pumping. I don't mean it eliminates the concern. We definitely are concerned about the potential for invasive species, increasing invasive species introductions. That's one of the things we'll be tracking with the pilot itself, is looking at how the community is changed with pumping, potentially with introduction even of invasive species. But I'll be honest, it's right now those opportunities exist. The locks open up several times an hour on average. And so there are opportunities for organisms to move from the port into the Banana River right now daily. And so that does mitigate some of the potential concerns, rather compared to other locations that we did explore for a pilot project. There was another question embedded in there, and it's slipped my mind. Oh, the pollutants, the concern about pollutants, very legitimate concern. Our plan for the pilot is to adhere to the ports and the locks emergency plan, whereas they actually have a protocol for closing the locks and isolating the port from the Banana River under certain conditions. And we would align perfectly with that plan, so that so there'd be little chance of us accidentally introducing, say, an oil spill into the Banana River. We could isolate the ports and leave it isolated until the conditions have been improved.
That's good. Okay, thank you. There's a couple, I don't know what these are, and I may ask the person who wrote them to come up here, but apparently there was a previous model or study that examined turnover in the Mosquito Lagoon. And how does the current model results correlate with that one?
I don't know the data on Mosquito Lagoon in particular. My focus over the past several years has been really on Banana River, the central IRL. So unfortunately, I can't make that comparison. I know that prior work conducted by DEP and some of the members of our team show that the water turnover rate for the Banana River, and I imagine it's similar for that most southern corner of the Mosquito Lagoon, it's really low. It's 2 to 3 years for that water to move, for even 50% of that water to move from the Banana River out of that compartment and disperse into other areas. And so that's one driver of why the Banana River and other portions of the lagoon are really having trouble with nutrients. It's not that so much that the nutrient loading in those areas is higher than elsewhere, it's that the nutrients stay there. They're less likely to get dispersed to other locations of the lagoon and then to be processed and removed from the system.
Thank you, Jeff, for staying with us. I just realized it's 1:15, and I don't know if we need to let people. I appreciate you willing to stay. Are you willing to stay?
I'm happy to stay to answer questions.
There are lots of questions. Thank you. And just so you all know, it's after 1, and if you need to go, we won't be insulted.
Ask about the DO thing. So that's
Do you want to, can you hear it? Oh, thank you. That's a good idea.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for a great presentation. And just to correct or add to your previous comments, so the funding you've gotten for this study so far does not come from the 0.5-cent sales tax. It comes from the state.
Right.
But, the soil plan does not pay for research, which is what you're all about. So that's great. Good on you. Keep it up. I have a question. So one of the things I took from your briefing is that the improvement in the ecosystem is going to come, if not exclusively, will come in large part from increased DO from bringing in the seawater.
Yeah.
Austin Fox did some studies in a canal with nano bubblers up in Satellite Beach. And my reading of that was it was not particularly successful. And so I'm just questioning why we think an increased DO in the water is going to result in, this cycle conversion where we suddenly start consuming nitrogen instead of emitting it.
Well, so I unfortunately cannot speak to the direct comparison of the microbubble study versus the inflow scenario. I know that the microbubble study ultimately did not work out to be, it seemed like a feasible way of improving water quality in the canals and then improving nutrients digestion and cycling within the canals. But the actual mechanism why the DO is the dissolved oxygen is different and better maintained with pumping, unfortunately, we're going to have to get back to you with an answer to that question once I can talk with Dr. Fox. I do know that one of the things that we're actually looking to take advantage of here is the fact that the incoming seawater is saltier and heavier. And so it comes in at a relatively high DO. It's saltier. It will sink to the bottom and it'll move along the bottom. So it'll actually improve DO, or the models are suggesting that it'll improve DO directly there where it's most needed, is right at that sediment interface. And then that will actually hopefully aid in the regeneration of nutrient cycling and the regeneration of that community within the sediments that can actually remove nutrients from the system. But again, we need Dr. Fox on the call here, which unfortunately he's not. He's teaching today, to be able to make a direct comparison between the relative benefits of the microbubbles versus the inflow system. And I'm sorry I can't answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you. So now we have another option if anybody wants to use the microphone. Sure.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
I was wondering how much funding you currently have for the project. I know how much you said you need total, but what have you been able to get from the state so far for the pilot project, and what are you still looking for?
We had the state has funded us for 2 years at roughly 800,000 per year to conduct our modeling and to do the baseline data generation and to develop the pilot engineering and designs for full-scale systems, and then to work with the permitting agencies to initiate the steps of developing a permit for the pilot itself. So with 2 years, the data that you see presented today is all based on those 2 years efforts, and our initiations of their discussions with Army Corps of Engineers and DEP and St. John's River Water Management District about the pilot itself and the pilot design. That's all based on those 2-year fundings, which together was 1.6 million. And so we're projecting anywhere from 3 to 5 million for the project as a whole, but in order to complete the pilot project.
Thank you. Okay, there's a series of questions. Well, first, there's a question about the graph that you showed at the beginning of the presentation on seagrass and manatee abundance in the banana. Where did you get that graph? Was that a paper that was published? And can you tell us where?
This was a report. Here it is. This was a report developed by NASA Kennedy Space Center, mostly for internal digestion. They were summarizing their historical data so they could have a better understanding of the status of the resources that are under their management, so that then they could develop their lagoon plan, the Lagoon Health Plan, I think is what they call it, which they've actually just released this past year. In our partnership with NASA, with Kennedy Space Center on this project, or partnership, they've been providing some data for this project. They've been providing guidance on development of the project. And then as part of that, they shared this data. It is publicly available. I don't have a direct link to it, but you can see. Yeah, you know what? What I could do is I can find where it's publicly available through NASA Kennedy Space Center and then provide a link if someone wants to reach out to me. And I would be happy to actually, well, my email is actually here at our last slide. Please feel free, anybody who wants to follow up with questions about the projects or questions about getting access to some of the data, please feel free to email me. You can see my email down here at jebel@fit.edu.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a series of questions on, speaking of flow, and this is a little bit off topic, but if you can address questions about causeways, causeway removal, raising causeways, causeway, modifications as a means to improve flows and water quality.
Well, so that question is right in Dr. Zerillo's wheelhouse. He's actually done some of the modeling on projected changes in circulation and on nutrient loads with causeway lifting or causeway removal. And what I know from his presentations is that there is an improvement. Residency times of the water actually decreases, which basically means the water flows better and is dispersed to other compartments more quickly. Nutrient loads, as a result, also decrease. So that is a definite benefit for the lagoon and that particular compartment, wherever that intervention is proposed. The relative comparison to inflow, I'm not sure, but as we move forward, one of the goals for Dr. Zerillo is to couple the modeling that he's done on the impacts of causeway lifting with the modeling he's done on inflow and look at the synergistic effect of both of those to see if there is a significant improvement in nutrient loads and ultimately dissolved oxygen as well.
Thank you. There's a series of questions about timing, like, first of all, and kind of what is it going to take to get this pilot project going? And we know one of the things is money. And then the second part is how long is it going to, after the 1-year pilot project, what is it going to take? What permitting is going to be needed? Oh, first, I'm sorry, what permits will be needed to implement the pilot project? And then at the end of the pilot, so let's just go with that. And then at the end, know that there's a follow-up question. What permits do you need right now to get started with your pilot project?
Well, so the permitting would actually primarily work through U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to have access to their lands, and then also through DEP and St. Johns River Water Management District to allow the dispersal of this water, the movement of this water into the lagoon. We've been working with all of those groups over this past year in particular to be able to lay the foundation for quick movement through the permitting should we secure funding for the pilots. They've been, each of those organizations has been consulting with us almost from the beginning, St. John's in particular and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, on the project, on our design of the project, and on addressing any concerns that they have that might impact permits. And again, that was part of the reason that we actually scaled back our approach for the pilots, was because of some concerns that FWC in particular brought up about a larger system and impacts to a broader area of Banana River without actually having anything but projections about what might happen. And so we were able to, through our design, to scale back the pilots, constrain potential impacts, good and bad, to the cove just south of the Canaveral locks, and with that simplified the permitting process considerably. But as far as how the permitting process will go, we won't really know until we actually submit the permit. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in particular has said that they've offered some great advice on how to address any concerns that they might have, but they won't provide a full evaluation of the project until the permit is actually submitted, and we can't do that until we've secured funding at least for another year.
Okay, and then a follow-up would be, assuming the pilot project is successful, how long will it take to permit, construct, and operate the system? How long will it take before the system will be fully functional and changing water quality parameters as the model implies? How much?
I think the big variable there is permitting. So even we can cross all our T's and dot all of our I's with the pilot project and provide a lot of meaningful data for understanding the potential impacts of a full system. And that will facilitate permitting for the full system if that's decided to be a fruitful opportunity to pursue. But we won't know really what the timeline is until we actually get a permit submitted. That would not be Florida Tech submitting that permit. I think that would be a project that either DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, or St. John's takes under their wing. Our university is focused on the research. We don't plan to manage a full operating system. We don't plan to construct a full operating system. All we can do is provide the data to allow other folks to evaluate whether that's a good idea or not. And then, so the timeline, I would estimate the construction itself, I don't think would take more than a year or two. But the actual timeline for the permitting, it could be quite quick. It could be as little as a year, but then again, with all the considerations, it might take quite a few years beyond that. But again, that is just a best guess, and I would argue that that's kind of a naive guess, based on little information, unfortunately.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the disclaimer. Okay, there's some questions about other locations. So one person asked about, have you considered an inflow project in the northern Indian River Lagoon by the Haulover Canal, coupled with a water well to calibrate the salinity?
No, we actually have not considered that. So the Haulover Canal, where would the water be moving from in that scenario? If I'm picturing my lagoon geology, I can't quite see how that seems to be, how that would be a feasible option. But we are, as far as the pilots, we've identified what we would argue the optimal location for the pilots, because of the close access to the water, the limited impact of moving this water over ground, and the fact that there's already inflow occurring in that area, so that mitigates some of our concerns about adding water. With the full-scale system, all sites would be reevaluated and examined to determine what is most cost effective and most beneficial for the lagoon itself. Our estimates are that actually, one of the best locations would be in the northern Banana River for a full-scale system, but that gets complicated really quickly. There are other sites that would be really amenable to a full-scale system as well, but they all have their positives and negatives that would have to be taken into consideration.
Okay, so it sounds like the pilot project site is pretty much determined, but to go full system installation, you may consider other locations. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That helps a lot. So I do want to emphasize that just because the Port Canaveral is the best site for the pilot, it does not mean it's the best site for a full system. And so that would be the location of the full system is still to be determined if there's interest in pursuing that option.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear it. That's well, there are a lot of more questions that we maybe don't need to talk about because of that option. Is it, concerns about, that the area that you're selecting for the pilot is already influenced because of the locks. So, and that the influence of this inflow project may be very, very small in its proximity. And other areas of the lagoon, and particularly, we recognize the northern Indian River Lagoon has got that same long-term retention time where we need some movement up there as well. And that's where the haulover would come in and trying to get the water across Merritt Island, right? If we're, you think it's complicated to get it into the Banana, try to get it into Titusville. Right? That's even harder. You gotta get it over Merritt Island somehow. But anyway, so that I guess if everybody understands, the pilot project location at the port is a convenience selection as well as a decent site just to do the testing, small scale. You can do a decent, neat pilot there. There are questions about the pilot location, including how are you going to control water levels in that little lagoon area, that little tiny basin that you're going to use for your pilot?
Yeah, and those are really good questions. This is what these questions that are coming up are questions that we've kicked around quite a bit more than a year ago when we really started getting serious about developing the design for the pilots. It became clear from year one funding that the pilot was necessary, and so with that we got serious about trying to identify or address all these questions. And while Port Canaveral was identified as in St. John's study as the best place for a pilot, we went in and just kind of looked at a variety of locations. And with Port Canaveral in particular, we were concerned about the fact that since there is inflow already, how are we going to manage the water quality in that cove in order to be able to replicate what we think might occur under a full inflow system? And what's nice actually is that the way that we've designed the system is that there would be sufficient water moving through that cove and then into the opening of the locks that basically we would alter the conditions within that whole small region there. So the cove and the locks themselves. So when the coves open, they would just be moving port water in between the experimental area and the port itself. So it would be just, what we've done is we've taken into consideration that exchange in the modeling in order to be able to show that we can actually provide a meaningful change in dissolved oxygen and temperature within that cove and the adjacent area in order to then ground truth and to test our predictions from the modeling and from the experiments that Dr. Fox has been doing. I hope that gets to the question, but if not, maybe we can try again.
Yeah, I think you got it. I'm looking at other ones, so forgive me for the delay. Okay, here's one from one of my board members. We've seen from the recent MRC report card that nitrogen levels in some parts of the lagoon have been reduced, but seagrass growth has not been seen to rebound. Are there variables other than nitrogen and phosphorus, such as herbicides, that might be affecting seagrass, and would greater tidal replenishment help with this?
Well, I can't speak to the effect of other pollutants on seagrasses. Seagrasses are again outside of my area. My area actually is on the genetic side, and here in the coordination of this project and as a representative for a broad team with skill sets that are quite a bit different than mine. What we have seen in other locations, though, is that even with improved nutrients, if you are regularly having hypoxic events, or the sediments themselves are so contaminated that the sediments are hypoxic, then you're not going to see seagrass restoration. So the nutrients are going to play a big part in determining the success of the seagrasses. Primarily not just because the nutrients provide food for the seagrasses, and in some cases preferentially for algae, but also because of just water clarity. So if we can improve water clarity, then we get the light down to the bottom where the seagrasses need it. But we have to think about, these are plants that actually have roots in the sediments. So we have to think about what's happening in the sediment if you want to think about what's the seagrasses need in order to be able to succeed. And the work on this project so far is suggesting that we can actually improve the conditions in the sediments in order to then provide what the seagrass is going to need, between the improved light quality, so improved light penetration, and then improved dissolved oxygen in the sediments themselves, and as part of that, a reduce in sulfides, hydrogen sulfides, which are toxic to seagrasses. These are all, again, projections. We actually need boots on the ground experiments to see if these projections hold up.
Great. Here's a really good question. How will you define success? What will residents see?
So the success of the pilot, I mean, honestly, operation of the pilot in itself, and the continuation of the ability to validate the models, whether it's the geochemical models, mostly, which are statistical models for most part, or the hydrodynamic models and the nutrient models that Dr. Zarillo has developed, or the fish distribution models. The success of those, the ability to actually test those, no matter what the outcome of the experiment is, as long as the experiment is designed robustly to provide a meaningful test of those predictions, we consider that a success, even if the predictions don't work out the way that we expected. Even if inflow does not alter the dissolved oxygen as we expected, the fact that we can actually test that and determine that is that's our goal right now. We don't have we don't have a preordained outcome of this project. We have expectations based on experiments, but we don't know really how it's going to work, because the system, the experiments that we've run and the models are not the real system. We have to actually alter the conditions at a site where water quality has been degraded for decade or more, that is regularly experiencing hypoxia. The sediment has been regularly experiencing hypoxia, anoxia, and we have to see how that system then responds to these changes. And our predictions so far suggest that it would respond favorably. But again, these are just predictions, and we need to test these predictions.
Okay, great. Everybody's still with me. I'm just here having a conversation with you. Thank you for staying.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you for providing the opportunity.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. I'm glad we were able to Zoom you in. There's a group of questions that I think you might be able to address pretty easily about just using the existing lock system. You know, how is this, I think it kind of gets to how does this differ from opening and closing the locks in a strategic way? For example, on an incoming tide, you open the locks, on an outgoing, you close the locks. So you end up with, you know, a one-way flow through the lock system. How would this differ from that?
My understanding is that that idea has been brought up a number of times, and there was an opportunity, kind of an inadvertent opportunity to explore that when I think some point years ago the locks actually broke and were stuck open. The currents, my understanding from talking with some of the folks at Army Corps of Engineers, is that the current moving through the locks actually undermined some of the infrastructure there and compromised the locks. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is very focused on continued maintenance and operation of those locks. And so they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize the transit of boats through that locks, and so, you know, opening the locks and maintaining them for tidal circulation, I think, is pretty much off the table as far as I know. But I mean, I could be wrong about that. And I think as we move forward, we can that can be a part of the discussion at a higher level far than I'm at. Our research, getting a permit and convincing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to open the locks for a set period of time is just impractical. It did not seem to be a fruitful way to pursue this project, which is where we ended up on the pumping scenario and just moving water above ground from the locks over to that cove, which U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been supportive of so far.
Okay, good answer. The series of questions on NASA launches, and have there been, do you suspect, or has there been any testing of water quality that might indicate that with increased launches, we're seeing increased pollution in the system?
Yeah, that is unfortunately way outside my area of expertise, but I do know from talking to some of the folks up at NASA Kennedy Space Center that is an integral part of their work. They've been doing that since prior to, since expansion of Kennedy Space Center back in the 70s, and they've been tracking water quality in that area. With one of the questions is to better understand the impact of launches. They have a lot of data on that. I bet most of it is publicly available, if not all of it, in reports, some of them more accessible than others, that's define the plume and the outfall from these launches, the area of impact, and the long-term consequences. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the details of that data and then what that means for future launches, but I know that NASA is looking into it just from the folks that I've talked to up there.
Okay, great. There are questions about loading. You mentioned nutrient loading, which I kind of thought might have not been the right words to use, but loading, you know, assuming things going from the land into the water, not in concentration in the water. But so since you mentioned loading, what is being done to get rid of nutrient loading from farms and lawn runoff, et cetera?
Well, I imagine some of your audience are as familiar or more familiar than I am with those various projects. You know, we highlighted several of those early on here just as a demonstration of the ongoing efforts, because we do want to highlight that this is not a silver bullet. Our projections for our suggestions to explore inflow as an option does not mean that we think it's going to solve all the problems of the lagoon. If it's going to have a benefit, a worthwhile benefit, it's going to be in concert with all these other efforts. And we know that the state, including not that long ago, Governor DeSantis awarded lots of additional funding to support the movement of folks off of septic to sewer. That's going to have a big long-term benefit for the lagoon. There's no doubt that if we can reduce nutrient inputs, so nutrient loading, nutrient inputs, sometimes the terminology gets a little bit confusing, and I totally understand. What the long-term success of the health of the lagoon is going to depend on reducing nutrient inputs. There's no getting around that. And inflow projects wouldn't so much do that, aside from being able to help jumpstart the natural cycling. Well, at least that's what our projections suggest, jumpstart the natural nutrient cycling to help the lagoon take care of itself. But it wouldn't work on its own. It would have to be in concert with lots of other projects. As an example, the muck removal of the muck is reducing nutrient loads by actually removing historic nutrients that accumulate on the bottom that continue to basically fertilize the lagoon. So we're dealing with nutrients that have been accumulating for decades. We do need to find a whole variety of strategies, apply a whole variety of strategies to address those nutrients.
Yes, and speaking of muck, assuming that this project goes forward, there's a question about a full-scale flow rate. I'm not sure you guys have any idea what that's going to look like yet. Do you have an idea of the pilot project is a half cubic meter per second flow rate? What's the full-scale flow rate?
We've been modeling, or Dr. Zerillo has been modeling a variety of scenarios, everything from 5 cubic meters per second all the way up to, I think the maximum that he got with a weir system was 30 cubic meters per second. So really big differences in flow rates. The idea of the pilot project is that it'll provide the validation of the model itself that Dr. Zerillo has developed, and the tuning, the ability to further tune that model. And then with that, final runs would be made on all these different inflow scenarios, and a summary of projections of projected impacts, good and bads, projected changes to the system would be presented. And then with that in all that data in hand, then we could look at determine what's the best balance between a flow rate and cost and benefits versus potential consequences, potential impacts.
Okay, great. And so if the project proceeds with the Banana River as the area for the input, is Dr. Zerillo modeling with the muck and the channel? I mean, the Banana River has a deep channel full of muck. Are we just adding salt water to move all that muck down the channel into the Indian River Lagoon?
Well, so he has sediment transport embedded right in his model, and sediment muck is sediment, it's just not very nice sediment. But so that we don't expect there would be much movement of the muck based on that, because the flow rates would actually be, once you get outside of the pumping area itself, the change in the circulation patterns within the Banana River would be relatively small. It would improve. We would be with inflow, especially with inflow at a full system level. You would improve circulation within the Banana River to a point you would actually decrease the residence time of that water significantly, but you wouldn't see much of a change in the actual velocity of the water. So I wouldn't expect there to be a significant change in the distribution of muck. I think that the wind events and the movement of water, the sloshing of water back from one end of the lagoon to the other is more likely to shift muck than just the inflow itself.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll stop there.
No, that's perfect. And the flow rate then, when you talk about full design, is 5? Is that the number that you guys are kind of leaning on as your full design flow rate?
Yeah, so 5 to 10 cubic meters per second, we often fall back on, because we do see improvements in Dr. Zerillo's models. We see improvements in the Banana River, in meaningful improvements in dissolved oxygen, nutrients, and chlorophyll levels at those rates. But it doesn't mean that a higher flow system is off the table and wouldn't be worth exploring. I think we really got to see what the data says from the pilot experiments.
Okay, thank you. So what are the potential negative impacts to the project? And if there aren't any, then what's keeping this from moving forward? Is it just that you need the funding, or what else are you missing to proceed?
Funding is the principal obstacle right now. I mean, permitting is definitely the next hurdle once funding is secured, even funding for another year to then continue exploring permitting and to initiate permitting. But like I said, we've done quite a bit of the groundwork for the permitting. We feel good about the ability to move through permits pretty quickly, because we've been getting inputs for the last 2 years on the project design. Now I've lost my train of thought there. There was what was the start of that question? I think I missed something.
It was, is there something critical that's preventing you from moving forward other than funding? Are there other unintended consequences, I suppose, so to speak, that are holding you back from moving forward?
So actually with the initial designs that St. John's had presented for a pilot, and that we, based on St. John's effort, were proposing for a pilot, there were a lot of concerns that would have complicated permitting considerably. Particularly FWC had legitimate concerns about impacts on the Banana River community. And what we decided, community, I mean by the biological community there, What we did with those concerns in mind is that we really ratcheted back that pumping volume to try to limit our impact to a small area to confine effects and still provide us with the change that we need to validate our projections. And so that's where we ended up with this 0.5 cubic meter per second pilot idea. And that's now, again, supported by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, tentatively supported by FWC. We're waiting on feedback from them for our year 2 final report. We've provided the full report to them. They've sharing it across the FWC program and getting input from a variety of people with different expertise to then offer their thoughts on the pilots and the project as a whole.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Here's an interesting question or comment, but it's just interesting. The person mentions correctly that the land development in the area has increased freshwater inputs to the Indian River Lagoon through stormwater. And with this increase in salinity, is it going to get us back in line with our historical Indian River Lagoon salinity levels before development, before all the stormwater was coming in to the lagoon?
That is a really interesting question. I think that would be one that Dr. Zerillo might have better insight into, or perhaps someone who is more familiar with the long-term conditions of the lagoon. That's unfortunately, I don't know what historic salinities in the lagoon were. I know what current salinities are, and I know that they're highly variable, sometimes getting up to 40 or more parts per thousand when we have a high evaporation. But yeah, that's a really interesting idea, and then I think that we'll need to look into that to see if the combination of increased seawater would mitigate the reduction in salinity that has likely occurred. I think that seems a reasonable assumption. That's likely occurred with the increased the input of freshwater input.
Hey, Jeff, the idea of you brushed on this idea and then you kind of just put it aside as too expensive and not feasible. But the idea of using horizontal pipes to access the ocean, either under A1A or wherever it could be done, is that something that, I mean, you put it to bed because it's too expensive? Would that be considered in the full implementation? Are you going to open the box back up to methods to get the water in when you think about where do we really want to place this inflow, project?
Yeah, so the pilot was always meant to be temporary. We are looking to run an experiment to test our predictions. With that, there's some significant constraints on cost. There's constraints on cost for any project, but in our case, there were significant constraints. It wouldn't have been feasible to try to get permitting and to construct a pipe probably a quarter mile offshore that then runs under A1A and pops up somewhere in a lagoon. That is beyond the scope of a pilot project. But you were totally right that is definitely a potential for a full-scale system. And it would actually it's a likely goal of a full-scale system, because ideally what we'd want to do is be moving as clean a water as possible. So the offshore water would be the target rather than Port Canaveral in that case.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to just read, there's a lot of, one person asks, and I hope you've already identified that you don't have any of these nearby, because this does happen all the time. What effect would the sewer treatment plant overflow or discharge nearby have on your pilot project? Do you know if you have any sewer plants nearby your pilot project that might overflow and mess up all your readings?
I don't think we do. I would have to talk to the Dr. Zerillo, who was looking closely at the site location data, and based primarily on his modeling and what's the co-occurrence of other infrastructure. I unfortunately can't answer that question. I need to look into it, but my assumption is that that's not the case. But I'm going to definitely look into that, and we will have to take that into consideration if it is an issue.
Yeah, well, it's just, it does happen. I get the announcements probably every day. I get some discharge somewhere from a wastewater treatment facility, sadly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's some suggestions. somebody suggests that well, actually they ask, but if there are any studies, thank you. If there are any studies in the Gulf Dead Zone that could assist. If there is any data for pre and post Sebastian Inlet construction, which I think that would be unlikely.
Yeah.
Sebastian Inlet's been there for 100 years, right? 100 years?
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately,
that would be cool. That would have been awesome. If anybody has it, we would have it. You know, we feel like we've been here for 100 years too. Are you showing me something? It's almost 2 o'clock. Oh, it's almost 2 o'clock. I got to shut up. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeff. I'm sure that you all are thinking about climate change. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Sharkey. I'm sorry, those of you who I didn't get to your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Steve to take us out. Thanks again, Jeff. Really appreciate your time.
No problem. No problem here. I'll stop my share and let you guys resume control of the presentation. Thank you all for the opportunity, and thank you everybody who tuned in to what was a great question and answer session.
Jeff, can we have 1 more minute of your time? I appreciate
I'm here, please.
I love your presentation. I appreciate you zooming in and taking the time. And this is above and beyond the hour Zoom we talked you into. So thank you. And I just want to speak to you. And this is a segment of your presentation that I think was golden. I just want to make sure that I understand it right. And you were communicating, there's a lot of advocacy for cutting and installing new inlets into the lagoon. There's a lot of the community that is interested in it. They are very strongly emotionally connected to this idea that we can connect new inlets to the system and save the lagoon with more flushing. So my understanding is that FIT has previously done studies to show the impact, and the impact of inlets is only a couple miles in a radius to benefit water quality and whatever the benefits are. And that is astronomically, the costs and the expenses are not feasible, and that the government entities, the permitting entities, it's a non-starter, never going to happen.
Yes, that's my understanding. You've summarized my take on the situation perfectly. It is, from what we've been told from Army Corps of Engineers and other folks that we've talked to, is that both costs and permitting are just unmanageable, and they aren't even willing to consider it. But that said, I mean, nothing is forever, especially in politics. And so the discussion should be maintained. Who knows? There might be an opportunity. But what we've seen that's most important, I think, here is that we're working on identifying a feasible system. We're going to test it and see if it's really worthwhile. But the goal here is to develop a system that's feasible within the environment that we exist, politically, financially, and then the lagoon itself, the ecosystem, in order to provide the improvements that we want for the lagoon. I think, yeah, right now, the discussion about an inlet is a non-starter with Army Corps of Engineers, but this discussion about a pumping system, they're more than happy to participate in that discussion, and they've been very supportive of it from the beginning.
So thank you. We endure many inquiries about the inlets, and if there is data that FIT has, is it available? Is there other studies to say, hey, this is what we got, this is the data, this is the impact? Is it available and posted and accessible for the public?
What I'll do is I'll contact Dr. Zarillo, who's very familiar with that information and has likely run some of those studies himself, and I will develop a list of that, and I'll share it with you so you can share it with your community if that works for you.
Because what we would like to do is educate the community, and we would like to encourage that same passion and advocacy towards like scenarios that are more feasible, like what you're saying. And there's a lot of individuals, agencies, groups that are working tremendously hard to improve the water quality of the lagoon. Yeah. And we just would like to channel it to the most practical and successful, avenues, because we need to do this now, you know.
I agree. So what I'll do is I'll contact Dr. Zerillo. I'll get him to send me the relevant papers, and then I'll share them with you. And then if you want to share them with the community or just post them to have them accessible, even just posting links, if I can find the links for those papers themselves, that if that works for you, I'm happy to do it.
Well, if everyone that is advocating for new inlets, if we can get them to advocate for funding for your project, I think that would be a win, right?
Well, I agree. We are funding constrained right now. We have 2 years under our belt. We've generated a lot of really good data, a lot of very good predictions about the impact of inflow. And now we need to run a pilot experiment to test those predictions.
Dr. Jeff Abel, thank you for your time. I think that was a home run. Appreciate it.
Stay
Yeah,
well.
you're welcome. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity, and thank you all for creating the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, you rock star.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We'll make him go away.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for your help today.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much again. That was awesome.